The cold seeped through the thin fabric of her dress, a familiar ache that settled deep in her bones. Stone was an unforgiving bed. Elara pressed her cheek against the grimy floor of the grand palace scullery, the air thick with the ghosts of 1,000 meals, stale grease, sour milk, and the sweet, agonizing scent of fresh bread she was forbidden to touch. Her stomach, a hollow cavern of want, clenched into a tight, painful knot. Hunger was a constant companion, a dull thrum beneath the surface of her fear. She waited. Every nerve was a wire pulled taut, listening for the heavy tread of the guards, the sharp clip-clop of the head cook's shoes, or the silken rustle of Lady Serafina's gowns, a sound that promised a fresh wave of cruelty. But the kitchens were finally silent, cloaked in the deep velvet of the post-midnight hour. Only the drip-drip-drip of a leaky faucet echoed in the cavernous space, a lonely metronome counting out the seconds of her stolen reprieve. With a trembling hand, she reached for the prize she'd risked a lashing for. A half-eaten roll, discarded on a platter destined for the slop bins. It was hard, probably days old, but it was sustenance. Her fingers, chapped and raw from lye soap, closed around it. The rough crust scraped her skin. She brought it to her lips, inhaling the faint, dusty scent of wheat. A pathetic feast. But it was hers. Before she could take a bite, a scent unlike any other cut through the kitchen's miasma. It wasn't food. It was ozone and pine needles after a storm, ancient earth and smoldering embers. It was power. It was dominance. It was the Alpha King. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the fog of her exhaustion. Kaelan was never in the kitchens. He was a creature of council chambers and training grounds, a phantom of authority, who existed only in terrified whispers among the staff. To be found here, like a rat scrabbling for crumbs, was a death sentence. She scrambled to her feet, the stale bread falling from her numb fingers and skittering across the flagstones. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. She tried to make herself smaller, to melt into the shadows cast by the towering ovens, but it was too late. The scullery door swung inward without a sound. He filled the frame, a silhouette of breathtaking power against the torchlight of the corridor. King Kaelan was larger than the stories told, his shoulders a bulwark, his presence a physical weight that pressed down on the very air she breathed. She didn't dare look at his face, keeping her eyes fixed on the polished tips of his leather boots. They were immaculate, even at this hour. They were the boots of a man who never had to kneel on a greasy floor. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just breathed. And with each inhalation, Elara felt that impossible scent wrap around her, invading her senses, pulling at something deep within her that she had long thought dead. It was a strange, terrifying warmth, a resonance that vibrated through her soul. "What is your name?" His voice was not the thunderous roar she'd expected. It was a low growl, rough like gravel, yet carrying an undercurrent of something she couldn't identify. It vibrated through the stone floor, up her legs, and settled in her chest. She couldn't speak. Her throat was a knot of terror. Words were a currency she couldn't afford. Words got you noticed. Noticed got you hurt. Look at me, it was a command, absolute and irresistible. The ancient, instinctual part of her, the part that knew the hierarchy of the pack, screamed at her to obey. Slowly, shakily, she lifted her head. Her gaze traveled up the hard muscle of his thighs, the fine black wool of his tunic, the broad expanse of his chest, until she met his eyes. And the world tilted on its axis. They were the color of molten gold, flecked with embers that seemed to burn with an inner fire. But it wasn't the color that stole her breath. It was the expression in them. Shock. Raw, staggering shock. And something else. Something fierce and possessive and aching. His nostrils flared, and she saw the muscles in his jaw bunch tight. His gaze dropped from her eyes to her gaunt cheeks, the faded bruise on her temple from where Lady Serafina had shoved her into a wall, the threadbare dress that hung off her too thin frame. Then his eyes landed on the discarded piece of bread on the floor between them. A sound tore from his chest. It wasn't a word. It was a growl, so deep and guttural it felt like the mountain itself was groaning in fury. It was not the sound of an alpha angry at a disobedient servant. It was the sound of a predator whose territory had been violated, whose most precious possession had been harmed. The raw power in that sound slammed into her, not as a threat, but as a shield. The air crackled. The torches in the hall flickered wildly. And the scent of him, that intoxicating storm and forest scent, intensified, flooding the room, blanketing her, claiming her. Mate. The word wasn't spoken. It bloomed in her mind, a terrifying, impossible flower of truth. It echoed in the sudden, violent thrum of the bond that snapped into place between them, a cord of shimmering energy that felt as real as a physical touch. She saw a flash of his own bewildered rage, felt the echo of his soul-deep recognition. He took a step forward. Instinctively, she flinched back, pressing herself against the cold, damp stone of the wall, a whimper escaping her lips. The sound died in her throat as she saw the agony that crossed his face. He froze, his hand half extended, his golden eyes filled with a conflict so profound it was a physical blow. He was fighting a war within himself, the instinct to drag her into his arms, to wrap her in his strength, warring with the clear evidence of her terror. Guard! His voice was a whip-crack of command that echoed down the stone corridor. A heavy-set warrior in the King's Guard livery appeared almost instantly, his eyes wide with alarm. Alpha King. Kalen never took his eyes off Alara. His voice dropped, lethally soft. Find head cook Beatrice. Bring her to me. Now he paused, his jaw working. And find my beater. Tell Marcus to come to the kitchens. Tell him I have found her. The guard's professional mask slipped, a flicker of stunned comprehension in his eyes before he bowed and hurried away. Huh? The word hung in the air, weighted with a significance that terrified Alara more than any threat. Kalen remained by the door, a sentinel guarding a treasure he was afraid to approach. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was charged, electric, filled with the hum of their newly awakened bond. He looked at the bread on the floor, and a fresh wave of fury rolled off him, so potent it made her teeth ache. No one, he growled, the words of vow spoken to the stones, to the gods, to her. No one will ever make you eat scraps again. And in the depths of her soul, past the fear and the starvation and the years of abuse, a tiny, forgotten spark flickered. It wasn't hope. She didn't know what hope felt like anymore. It was something wilder. Something that recognized the call of its other half. The palace had been her prison for 5 years. But the king's promise, born of a rage that burned for her, did not feel like a new cage. It felt like the rattling of the lock. Head cook Beatrice arrived in a flurry of starched linen and indignation, her fleshy face pinched with sleep and annoyance. She was a mountain of a woman who ruled the kitchens with an iron ladle and a tongue sharp enough to flay skin. When she saw the Alpha King standing grimly in the scullery, her blustering demeanor faltered. When she saw Alara cowering against the wall, it vanished entirely, replaced by a pasty, fearful pallor. Your Majesty, she curtsied, her knees cracking in protest. I was not aware you would be inspecting. Kalen's golden eyes were chips of ice. He didn't even glance at the cook. His gaze was locked on Alara, cataloguing every shiver, every hitched breath. Her name, he commanded, his voice flat and dangerous. Beatrice's eyes darted to Alara. The Omega. Alara, Your Majesty, the word Omega was laced with casual contempt. It was a brand, a designation for the weakest, the packless, the worthless. A low growl rumbled in Kalen's chest. She works for you, it was not a question. Yes, Your Majesty. Scullery maid. Since her pack was absorbed after the Western Rebellion. And in 5 years, has she ever been allotted a proper meal? The cook's face tightened. The omegas and servants eat after the household staff, Your Majesty. They take what is left. It is the law of the house. The law of your house, Beatrice, Callan corrected, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. He finally turned to look at her, and the full, crushing weight of his royal authority descended. Show me her rations for the day. Beatrice began to sweat. Majesty, the hour is late. The kitchens are closed. Show me, he repeated, and the command brooked no further argument. Trembling, the cook led him to a small, dark pantry at the back of the kitchens. It smelled of damp and mouse droppings. On a low shelf sat a few wooden bowls. Beatrice pointed to one containing a congealed lump of grey porridge and a wizened apple core. Callan stared at the bowl. He didn't touch it. He didn't speak. But Alara felt his reaction through the bond, a tsunami of ice-cold, murderous rage that was so immense it made her gasp. It was a fury on a scale she couldn't comprehend, the fury of a king who discovers treason in his own halls. This wasn't just about food. It was about a profound, systemic cruelty enacted under his roof, against his mate. Marcus, Callan said, his voice deceptively calm. His beater, a tall, scarred warrior with intelligent grey eyes, had arrived silently during the confrontation. He now stood just inside the pantry door, his expression grim. Alpha. From this moment, Alara is under your personal protection. She will be housed in the royal wing. She will be given a new wardrobe, a physician, and anything else she requires. No one is to approach her without my explicit permission. No one. His gaze flicked to Beatrice, who looked as if she were about to faint. That especially includes the kitchen staff and Lady Serafina. Am I understood? Perfectly, Alpha, Marcus said, his eyes already on Alara, a flicker of awe and deep respect in his gaze. He understood. The whole palace would understand by sunrise. Callan turned back to the cook. You are dismissed from your duties, Beatrice. Confine yourself to your quarters. The council will determine your punishment in the morning. Beatrice let out a strangled sob, and practically ran from the pantry. The Alpha King was alone with Alara and his beater now. The suffocating authority receded slightly, replaced by an awkward, tense silence. Callan took a half-step toward her, his big hands clenched at his sides as if restraining himself. Alara, he said, her name a rough caress. I will not harm you. She believed him. The bond, terrifying as it was, sang with the truth of his words. It hummed with his desperate need to protect, to soothe, to provide. But belief wasn't enough to erase 5 years of conditioning. She was a stray dog who had only ever known kicks. She didn't know how to react to a gentle hand. So she stayed pressed against the wall, silent and trembling. A look of profound pain crossed his features. He understood. He turned to his beater. Marcus. Take her. Be gentle. Marcus approached her slowly, as one might approach a frightened fawn. He kept his eyes low, his posture non-threatening. Alara, he said softly. My name is Marcus. I am the Alpha King's beater. I am going to take you to a warm room, with a soft bed, and a hot meal. No one will bother you. I give you my word. She looked from Marcus's kind, weary face to Callan, who watched them with an expression of raw hunger and forced restraint. He wanted to be the one to lead her away. He wanted to be the one to offer comfort. But he knew he was the source of her fear, his power too overwhelming. That small act of understanding, of putting her comfort before his own primal instincts, was the first real crack in the wall around her heart. She gave Marcus a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He offered his arm. She hesitated, then slid her small, chapped hand into the crook of his elbow. His tunic was made of fine wool, warm and solid beneath her fingers. As he led her out of the pantry, past the cold ovens and the scullery, where her life had just irrevocably shattered and reformed, she risked one last glance back. Callan was still standing there, a solitary giant amidst the shadows. He hadn't moved. He was watching her go, his golden eyes burning with an emotion so fierce and profound it made her soul ache in response. It was the look of a man who had just found the one thing he could not live without, only to discover it was broken. The royal wing was another world. The air smelled of beeswax and dried roses instead of grease and despair. Thick tapestries depicting ancient hunts and forgotten battles covered the stone walls, swallowing sound and keeping the cold at bay. Elara walked on a thick wool runner, her worn-out slippers sinking into the pile. It was more luxury than she had experienced in her entire life. Marcus led her to a set of carved oak doors and pushed one open. "These will be your chambers," he said quietly. The room was larger than the entire servants' dormitory. A fire already crackled in a vast stone hearth, casting a warm, dancing glow over a four-poster bed piled high with furs and downy pillows. A small table was set near the fire with a silver tray laden with food, roasted chicken, fresh bread with butter, a bowl of steaming broth, cheese, and a pitcher of what smelled like spiced cider. The sight of it made her dizzy. It was more food than she'd seen in a month. "A physician will be by in the morning," Marcus continued, his voice gentle. "And a seamstress. For now, there are bathing supplies in the adjoining room, and a nightgown has been laid out. The guards outside the door are loyal to the king. No one will enter without your permission." He paused, his grey eyes searching her face. "You are safe here, Elara." She wanted to believe him. She truly did. But safety was a foreign concept, a language she didn't speak. She could only nod, her throat too tight to form words. He seemed to understand. With a slight bow, he backed out of the room, closing the heavy door behind him with a soft click. The sound of a bolt sliding into place on the outside was both reassuring and terrifying. A gilded cage was still a cage. Alone, Elara drifted toward the fire, drawn by its warmth. She held her hands out to the flames, watching the light play over her scarred knuckles and dirt-caked fingernails. She felt like a ghost haunting someone else's life. This opulence, this care, this attention, it wasn't for her. It was for the mate of the Alpha King. A role. A title. Something she had no idea how to be. Her stomach rumbled, a painful, insistent demand that broke through her daze. She approached the table with a suspicion born of long habit. Was it a test? Would someone burst in and punish her for touching it? She picked up a piece of the warm bread. It was soft, yielding. She broke off a tiny piece and put it in her mouth, her senses exploding with the simple, perfect taste of fresh yeast and butter. A tear slid down her cheek, hot and unexpected. She hadn't cried in years. Crying, like speaking, got you noticed. She ate slowly at first, then with a ravenous hunger that shamed her. She devoured the chicken, the broth, the cheese, stopping only when her long empty stomach protested. Leaning back in the plush chair, a wave of exhaustion washed over her, so heavy it was a physical weight. Her body, finally warm and fed, was shutting down. She explored the bathing chamber, a marvel of copper pipes and a tub big enough for three. The steam, scented with lavender, filled the small room. She scrubbed away years of grime, watching the water turn grey. The girl staring back from the polished silver mirror was a stranger, thin and pale, with eyes too large for her face, shadowed with a weariness that went bone-deep. But they were clear. For the first time, they were clear. Wrapped in a nightgown of impossibly soft cotton, she climbed into the massive bed. The furs were heavy, the pillows like clouds. She expected to lie awake for hours, her mind racing with fear and confusion. Instead, the moment her head touched the pillow, she was pulled into a deep, dreamless sleep. She awoke with a start, her heart pounding. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, but the room was not dark. A sliver of pre-dawn light filtered through the tall, arched window. But that wasn't what had woken her. It was a presence. He was there. Kaelan stood near the window, a dark shape against the growing light. He was utterly still, watching her. There was no sound of the bolt being drawn, no creak of a door. How had he gotten in? She sat up, clutching the furs to her chest, her brief sense of safety evaporating like mist. "I did not mean to wake you," he said, his voice a low rumble that did not disturb the quiet. "I needed to see you were all right." She could feel him through the bond, a steady thrum of anxiety, protectiveness, and a deep, aching loneliness that stunned her with its intensity. It was his loneliness that disarmed her. A king shouldn't be lonely. "How did you get in?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from sleep. He gestured to a section of the tapestry-covered wall. "A private passage. It connects my chambers to these. They have always been reserved for the lunar." The word hung between them, shimmering with unspoken meaning. Luna. His queen. His other half. Her. The scullery maid who ate scraps. The absurdity of it was a bitter pill. "I am not a Luna," she said, the words tasting like ash. "You are my mate," he countered, his voice raw with certainty. "Fate does not make mistakes. Fate didn't see me scrubbing floors for 5 years. Fate didn't see me," her voice broke. She couldn't say it. Couldn't speak of the casual cruelties, the constant hunger, the slow, grinding erosion of her soul until she was nothing but a ghost in her own skin. He moved then, crossing the room in 3 long, silent strides. He didn't come to the bed. He knelt on the floor beside it, a gesture of supplication so profound from a man of his power that it stole her breath. He was putting himself below her, making himself smaller. He was giving her all the power in the room. "No," he said, his golden eyes burning with self-recrimination. "Fate was not blind. I was. This happened in my house, under my rule. The failure is mine, Elara. And I will spend the rest of my life atoning for it." He reached out, his hand hovering in the space between them, not touching, giving her the choice. "May I?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. She stared at his hand. It was large, calloused from wielding a sword, yet it trembled slightly. This was the hand of a king, a conqueror, a killer. And it was being offered to her with a vulnerability that mirrored her own. Hesitantly, she reached out and laid her small, scarred hand in his. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of pure energy arced between them. It was not sexual, it was something far deeper, a shock of recognition on a cellular level. A click of a lock falling into place. She felt his strength, his steadiness, his unwavering focus on her. And through the bond, she felt him gasp as he received the echo of her own feelings, the fear, yes, but also the flicker of trust, the dawning of a fragile, terrifying hope. He didn't grab or pull. He simply held her hand, his thumb stroking gently over her knuckles, a silent promise of comfort, of safety, of reverence. "Your hands are cold," he murmured. "They are always cold," she replied without thinking. "Not anymore," he vowed, his voice a guttural promise. "Never again." The morning brought the promised chaos, but it was a chaos that swirled around her without touching her. The physician, a kind-faced elderly wolf named Alistair, examined her with gentle hands and a sorrowful expression. He clucked his tongue over her malnutrition, the network of faded scars on her back, the new bruises from Serafina. He prescribed nutrient potions, salves, and long hours of rest. The seamstress arrived with an army of assistants, bolts of velvet, silk, and warm wool in every conceivable color. They measured her with quiet efficiency, their professional detachment a blessing. She felt like a doll being dressed, an object being prepared for display, but she knew this was Kaelan's way of providing for her, of erasing the visible marks of her past. Through it all, Marcus was a constant, silent presence at her door, deflecting the curious, turning away the sycophantic, and ensuring her peace. The palace was buzzing. Whispers followed her like her own shadow. The Omega Maid, found by the king. His mate. It was a fairy tale and a scandal all at once. The most dangerous whispers, she knew, would be coming from Lady Seraphina. Later that afternoon, as Alara sat by the fire, wrapped in a thick woolen robe, there was a sharp, imperious knock at the door. Marcus's low voice could be heard, then a higher, sharper one, dripping with disdain. "I am Alpha of my own house, Beta. You will not deny me an audience with a servant." The door opened, and Lady Seraphina swept in, her silks rustling like angry snakes. She was beautiful in a cold, sharp way, with eyes the color of a winter sky and a mouth permanently set in a sneer. Two of her personal guards flanked her, big brutes who looked at Alara with open contempt. Marcus stood in the doorway, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, his expression thunderous. "Leave us," Seraphina commanded him, not even deigning to look at him. "My orders are from the Alpha King," Marcus said, his voice like stone. "I am not to leave her side." Seraphina's eyes narrowed. She turned her venomous gaze on Alara. "So, the little rat has a new hole to hide in. A much nicer one, I see." She stalked into the room, her scent, cloying, artificial perfume over the sharp scent of an angry wolf, filling the air. "You must think you're very clever. Did you trap him? Did you offer your pathetic body to the king to get out of the scullery?" Alara flinched, wrapping the robe tighter around herself. The old fear, the instinct to cower and apologize, rose in her throat. But something else rose with it. The memory of Kalen kneeling at her bedside. The feel of his hand in hers. The echo of his protective rage through the bond. She lifted her chin and met Seraphina's icy gaze. "The king found me," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "You should be more concerned with what he thinks of how his guests treat the people under his roof." Seraphina's perfectly painted lips curled back in a snarl. "You dare? You worthless, packless Omega. You are nothing." A speck of dirt he found on his boot. "He will tire of his new toy, and when he does, I will personally throw you back into the gutter where you belong. I will make sure your life is a living hell." She took a step closer, raising her hand, her long nails glinting in the firelight. Alara braced herself for the sting of a slap. It never came. A blur of motion, a gust of wind that smelled of pine and ozone, and Kalen was there. He had moved from the connecting passage with a speed that was not entirely natural, positioning himself between Alara and Seraphina. He caught Seraphina's wrist in a grip that made her gasp, his fingers wrapping completely around her slender arm. "You will not touch her," he snarled. The sound was pure, undiluted predator. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. His golden eyes were no longer embers, they were blazing infernos. "You will not speak to her. You will not even look at her again." "Kalen!" Seraphina cried, her arrogance shattered by fear. "She is a nobody. A trick. She has enchanted you. She is my mate," he roared, the sheer force of his voice rattling the windows. "She is your future queen. And you just threatened her in my own palace." He tightened his grip, and a bone in Seraphina's wrist audibly cracked. She screamed, a high, piercing shriek of pain and shock. "You will pack your things," Kalen continued, his voice dropping to a lethal calm as he released her. She cradled her broken wrist, tears of rage and agony streaming down her face. "You and your guards will be gone from my lands by sunset. If I ever see your face again, I will not be so merciful. Your alliance with this throne is over." He turned his back on her completely, a dismissal more profound than any blow, and faced Alara. The fury in his eyes softened instantly to concern, as he scanned her for any injury. Did she harm you? Elara shook her head, her gaze fixed on the weeping, humiliated she-wolf being escorted out by a disgusted-looking Marcus. She had never seen anyone stand up for her. She had never imagined such a thing was possible. To see her tormentor so utterly vanquished, so swiftly and completely, was dizzying. When the door closed, leaving them alone, the silence was heavy. Kaelin reached out and gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I am sorry you had to endure that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It will not happen again. I swear it on my life." The bond between them pulsed, warm and strong. It was filled with his sincerity, his fury on her behalf, his regret. But woven within it was a thread of something else. A question. A deep-seated uncertainty. "What is it?" she whispered, sensing his inner turmoil. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Serafina was right about one thing. "You are not an Omega." Elara stiffened. I was branded as one when my pack fell." "It was a lie," Kaelin said, his eyes intense. "I can feel your power, dormant and suppressed, but there. It feels old. Powerful. An Omega could never be my mate. The power imbalance would destroy them. Which means someone, 5 years ago, not only destroyed your pack, but went to great lengths to hide who you are. The question is, why?" His words hung in the air, unlocking a door in her mind she had kept sealed for years. Memories, fragmented and shrouded in the smoke and terror of that final night. Her parents, shoving her into a cellar. The scent of a strange alpha, not from the attacking pack. A whispered word. A symbol carved into the wood above her head. "The Lycan's heart," she breathed, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. Kaelin's eyes widened in shock. "What did you say?" "My mother," Elara whispered, her mind reeling as the past came rushing back. Before she locked the door, she said, "The Lycan's heart beats in you. Hide it. Keep it safe." "I thought it was just a story." Kaelin stared at her, a look of dawning, earth-shattering realization on his face. "It's not a story," he said, his voice filled with awe. "It's a bloodline. The original bloodline. The one from which all alphas descend. We thought it had died out 1,000 years ago." He cupped her face in his hands, his golden eyes searching hers, no longer seeing a scullery maid, but a lost queen. "They didn't just conquer your pack, Elara. They were hunting you." The revelation that she was not a weak Omega, but the last heir to a legendary bloodline, was a weight and a liberation all at once. Kaelin launched a quiet, intense investigation, pulling ancient scrolls from the royal library, and sending his most trusted scouts to the ruined lands of her former pack. He spent hours with her, not as a king to a subject, but as a partner, gently coaxing forth the fractured memories of her childhood, piecing together a puzzle that had been scattered for years. He learned of her family's sigil, the snarling wolf's head inside a crown of thorns, a symbol for the Lycan's heart. He learned her father had been a reclusive, but respected alpha, who had refused all alliances, seeking only to protect his people and his secret. And he learned the name of the traitor who had sold them out, Lord Vorlag, a sour-faced, ambitious council member, who had long advocated for consolidating power by eliminating weaker packs. Vorlag had been a vocal supporter of Serafina's claim to be lunar. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture of conspiracy and treason that reached into the very heart of Kaelin's court. As the truth of her past emerged, something inside Elara began to shift. The dormant power Kaelin had sensed stirred within her. It started small, a heightened sense of smell that allowed her to identify a courtier's lie by the scent of his sweat, a flash of insight that helped Kaelin unravel a tangled trade dispute, a warmth that bloomed in her hands when she tended to the wilting roses in her private garden, coaxing them back to life. Kaelin nurtured it. He took her to the private training grounds, away from prying eyes. He didn't teach her to fight like a warrior, but to connect with the power inside her, the ancient, earthy magic of her bloodline. It was a power of life, of intuition, of connection to the land and the pack. It was the power of a true Luna. Their bond deepened with every passing day. The fear that had defined her for so long slowly receded, replaced by a tentative trust, then a fierce loyalty, and finally, a love that was as deep and profound as the earth itself. She saw past the Alpha King to the man beneath, the weary leader, who carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders, the lonely soul who had waited a lifetime for his other half. He, in turn, saw not a victim, but a survivor of incredible strength, a woman with a spirit that had refused to be extinguished. Their first kiss was not a thing of passion, but of reverence. It happened late one night in the library, surrounded by the scent of old parchment and beeswax. He had been tracing the lineage charts, his brow furrowed in concentration. She had brought him a cup of tea, and as she set it down, her fingers brushed his. The now familiar jolt of energy passed between them, and he looked up, his golden eyes soft in the candlelight. He simply leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a gentle, questioning touch that spoke of respect and a deep, soul-shaking affection. She responded without hesitation, her heart blooming with a warmth that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the man before her. But the shadow of Vorlag and the remnants of Serafina's influence still lingered. They knew their conspiracy was close to being unraveled. They had to act. Their chance came during the Blood Moon ceremony, an ancient ritual where the Alpha King reaffirmed his bond with the pack and the ancestral lands. It was held at the heart of the kingdom, at a nexus of monolithic standing stones that pulsed with latent power. It was a night of celebration, but also of vulnerability. Kaelin had insisted Alara stand beside him, not behind him. He presented her to the assembled alphas of the allied packs, not as his chosen mate, but as the last daughter of the Lycan's heart, a queen in her own right. It was a bold political move, a declaration that his rule would be a partnership, a union of the two most powerful bloodlines. The announcement sent shockwaves through the crowd, awe and respect from most, but from a shadowed corner where Vorlag stood with his cronies, a palpable wave of hatred. As Kaelin began the ritual, raising a ceremonial silver dagger to the sky, the attack came. It was swift and brutal. Assassins, bearing Vorlag's crest, emerged from the shadows, their blades coated with silver, lethal to werewolves. At the same time, Vorlag himself lunged for Alara, a cruel knife in his hand. "The bloodline ends with you, bitch," he snarled, his face a mask of crazed ambition. The Alara of a month ago would have frozen. She would have whimpered. She would have died. But this Alara was different. The fear was there, a cold spike in her veins, but her love for Kaelin, her newfound sense of self, and the ancient power humming in her blood were stronger. As Vorlag lunged, she didn't scream. She threw her hands up, not to defend, but to attack. A wave of pure, untamed energy erupted from her. It was not fire or lightning, but the raw life force of the earth itself. Thorny vines, thick as a man's arm, burst from the ground, wrapping around Vorlag's legs, pulling him down. The grass at her feet grew with supernatural speed, twisting into green tendrils that lashed out, disarming his guards. Kaelin, fending off two assassins, saw what was happening. A fierce, proud grin split his face. He roared, a sound of pure alpha power that sent a tremor through the battlefield, and fought with renewed savagery, no longer worried for her safety but glorying in her strength. The fight was short and decisive. Kaelin's royal guard, led by Marcus, quickly subdued the remaining assassins. Kaelin himself stalked toward the ensnared Vorlag, his silver dagger now dripping with the blood of his enemies. "Treason," Kaelin growled, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "And for what? Power. You tried to extinguish the most sacred bloodline for a seat on my council." Vorlag spat on the ground. "That bloodline makes you weak. A true alpha rules alone." Kaelin looked at Alara, who stood surrounded by the evidence of her incredible power, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with life. He looked back at Vorlag, his expression filled with a mixture of pity and contempt. You are a fool. You don't understand the first thing about true strength. He raised the dagger. Justice was delivered under the light of the blood moon. In the aftermath, as the guards cleaned up the mess and the loyal alphas renewed their pledges with a fervor they hadn't shown in years, Kaelin pulled Alara away from the crowd, toward the edge of the clearing. The moon bathed them in its crimson light. He took both of her hands in his gaze filled with an emotion so powerful it made her tremble. You saved us, he said, his voice thick. Your power. Alara, you are magnificent. We saved each other, she corrected softly, her heart full. He smiled, a true, unguarded smile that lit up his entire face. That we did, he squeezed her hands. I presented you tonight, as a queen of your own bloodline. And you are. But I must ask you now as a man. Not as your fated mate, not as your king, but as the man who has fallen completely in love with you. Alara of the Lycan's heart, will you be my Luna? My partner? My wife? There was no command in his voice. No expectation. Only a vulnerable, hopeful question. He was giving her the choice, the one thing that had been stolen from her for so long. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in her life, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She thought of the cold scullery floor, of the stale bread, of the ghost she used to be. And she looked at the powerful, wonderful man before her, who had not rescued a damsel, but had given a queen the space to find her own crown. Yes, she whispered, the word of vow. Yes, Kaelin. Always. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding forever, and pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, and she could feel the shudder that went through his powerful frame. It wasn't about power or politics or bloodlines anymore. It was just them. A man and a woman who had found their other half in the most unlikely of places. Lifting her head, she met his lips, and their kiss was not one of gentle reverence or quiet affection. It was a kiss of fire and triumph, of promises kept and a future claimed. It was the kiss of a king and his queen, an alpha and his Luna, two halves of a single soul, finally, irrevocably, whole. The palace had been shaken the night he found her, but tonight, under the blood moon, they had remade the world.